Hello, everyone. I'm Craig, and I run the Harkive project, and it's very exciting to be here at Music Tech Fest today, so thank you to Andrew and Michaela for inviting me. My area of interest and research is music consumption in the digital age, and Harkive is my attempt to investigate that. With my time today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the project, how it works, how it came about, the story of the project so far, if you like, and where it goes next. So, what is Harkive? It's something I've been developing over the last 2 years. It started, as Andrew said, as my final project for my MA Music Industries, and in about 2 weeks' time, it will form the basis of my PhD for the next 3 years. It's an online, crowdsourced method of collecting stories from people about how they listen to music on a single day each year. So there's a clue to the motivations and aims of the project in the name. Harkive is a word I made up. It's a mixture of two words, hark, to listen, and archive, a place where documents are kept. And the original intention was to create an archive of the many and varied ways in which people listen to and talk about music and map how those change over time. It ran for the first time in July 2013. It ran again on the 15th of July this year. And it will run again in 2015 and each year after that. And I'm in the process of developing some different strands to the project, which will see the light of day as the PhD progresses. But in a nutshell, it was my original hope that Harkive would grow into a useful resource for anyone interested in studying popular music, whether that be the technology, the culture, the history, or the business. So I'm aiming quite high with it, if you like. So how did it come into being? Well, it was developed as much out of a sense of frustration as it was out of a growing academic interest. The initial frustration was personal. When I was, about 2 years ago, I was thinking about 2004 when I first started working in digital music, and I was trying to think about how I listened to music back then, and I couldn't remember. This was obviously before things like Spotify, YouTube, etc. And then I tried to piece together my relationship with formats and devices over the last decade, and again I drew a bit of a blank. And I was struck by the truth of what Bauman said about liquid modernity, which is paraphrased on this slide here, quite clumsily, about how the way we act is changing faster than our ability to create habits. And I'm sure some of you will have read what Andrew has to say about the digital age, how digital is an environment we inhabit, and how our behavior is evolving with that. And it struck me as it would be a terrible shame if our collective if the story of our collective navigation through this revolutionary period in pop history wasn't documented in some way. And that's where the kernel of the idea for the archive came from. The other element of frustration came from keeping a keen eye on the news and the debates around digital music. So debates about whether streaming was cannibalizing downloads or whether streams represented a poor deal for musicians, which I'm sure you're aware of these debates. They're good examples of the debates I mean, and there are many others. And it seemed to me that with those debates, the services and formats and therefore by extension the consumption practices that people were involved with were being compartmentalized and viewed in isolation, and very little attention was being paid to what was actually happening on the ground, where my hunch was that things were a little bit more complicated. So I became interested in what the motivations were for music listeners to consume music in the ways that they do. And I became interested in the things that people said and did around their music consumption. So by that I mean how they acquired it, how they stored it, how they organized it, how they talked about it, how they danced, how they thought, and also how we represent ourselves, either consciously or otherwise, through the act of our music consumption. And I became extremely interested in this idea on the screen, or in testing out this idea that no two people listen to music in precisely the same way. And by that I mean that we may use services and formats and devices that are common to others, but our motivations for doing so and the situations we find ourselves in will differ hugely. And that throws a lot of light then and raises questions about things that are hot topics in the music industry at the minute, such as music curation, music recommendation services. You know, they're very difficult to achieve. So Harkive was my attempt at investigating this. I decided early on that I needed to focus on the how, where, and why people listened, because I thought that that was where the interesting detail might lie. And I thought that the what was pretty well catered for by things such as audio scrobbling, personal playlists, radio, the charts, etc. But also, I figured that by asking people how, where, and why, I would also get the what, which turned out to be the case. I also decided that what I wanted was volume. I didn't want Harkive to be something that non-geeks or internet-cautious people might not be want to contribute to. And I didn't want to alienate casual music fans and only gather stories from, say, hardcore record collectors or techno experts or something like that. I wanted everybody. So I decided, problematically from an academic research viewpoint, possibly, and I'll find that out, that I wanted everything. So I set up 11 different collection methods, which are on the screen there, and simply invited people to tell me their story of the day. Other than a request for how, where, and why, there were no parameters, no set questions, no upper or lower word limits. Contributions could be anything from a long-form essay on a blog post or an email or a tweet. People could also tell their story with a photo on Instagram, Flickr, an audio diary on SoundCloud or Audioboo, or video clips on YouTube and so on. I then, because I was focusing on one day each year, I had to promote this thing. So I pulled in some favors from record companies, friends who gave me records, CDs, T-shirts, etc. to give away. And then I got some music journalists and musicians to write some example contributions for me. So Andrew Harrison, who was the editor at Q at the time, Neil Codlin from the band Suede, they wrote examples for me which I could put up online, and that helped spread the word. Of course, by focusing on one day, I had given myself this huge single point of failure. And as the day approached, I had this kind of nagging fear that it would all fall flat. But I'm pleased to report that the opposite happened almost. Harkive became the #1 trending topic on Twitter. It picked up coverage in things like The NME. And Radio 3, BBC Radio 3, talked about the project on air all day and encouraged their listeners to contribute. It was a hugely, hugely surreal experience to be sat at home in front of my computer and watch something I'd come up with go viral on the internet. It was actually quite scary. There was a point where I thought, I can't stop this. You know, it just went. So once the dust had settled, on the Harkive days, I was left with this big, unwieldy pile of data. And I'm not going to bore you with statistics, but the headline figures, if you want boring statistics, they're on the website. The headline figures were that over 1,300 people contributed in 2013, generating over 2,500 entries. And in 2014, 881 people, so slightly less, generated the same amount of contributions almost, 2,455. The reasons why there are more entries than contributors is because of some of the methods. So, for example, Twitter, people documented their day across several tweets. For those of you who enjoy fun facts, the record number of tweets by an individual contributor is 52, which sets the bar quite high for any of you thinking about contributing next year. I'll give you an example of some of the tweets that we received. Opened a packet of biscuits and reflected on how much it sounds like Orteca's Bass Cadet. I Can Hear Next Door's radio has got the news on. If I shut the window, I won't hear what crap music it might play afterwards. Possibly one of my favourite Harkive tweets ever. Walking down a corridor at work, rapping all the lyrics to Rapper's Delight. I am 51 and 11/12 years old. Just missed You Can't Hurry Love by Phil Collins for Lust for Life. Galaxy 500 on Spotify, getting bin bags in Asda. Okay? There are thousands of these, okay? There are also longer form ones, obviously, you know, big essays. So given the sheer weight and variety of the submissions that I've received, and bearing in mind that I'm at a very early stage of my research, what have I been able to tell so far? Based on a sort of a cursory analysis of the data and of a reading through, this is what I've discovered, if you like. The respondents use a range of technologies, formats and services, and they bounce from one to another with incredible speed and dexterity. that means 1 minute you listen to Spotify, next minute you listen to a CD, next minute you're listening to something on SoundCloud, etc., etc. And I think that makes, it raises the question of how useful it is to consider people in such limited terms of reference as a vinyl collector or a Spotify user, for example. These moves from one technology to another are often dictated by place. So even a short walk from one room to another can alter the technology that we use. And it's interesting also that respondents sometimes chose an inferior technology over an available superior one. So a good example there would be that analog radios are used a lot in the kitchen when our iPhones are more than capable of delivering radio to us. We're also sold on the convenience and advanced nature of some of these music products and services that we use. But there were numerous examples in the responses of improvisation, of a sense of make, do, and mend. So, for example, one guy, his radio was broken in his car, so with a mixture of Velcro and wires, he rigged up his iPhone to be his stereo in his car, for example. And it seems that these kind of life hacks, if you will, could potentially lead us towards the development of some new products, services, or even formats, if we look at them closely. Another thing was that our use of online technologies and services are becoming as deeply embedded in the way we communicate about music as they are in the way in which we listen. So it's interesting that the relationship between listening to and communicating about music is evolving. So these conversations take place in real time on social media now, for example, when they used to, and still do, take place in the pub, in the workplace, and so on and so forth. So it may be useful to develop some methods of understanding these changes and looking at them a bit more closely. And finally, what I've noticed is that was an unexpected one. A difference between 2013 and 14 was that a number of people who didn't contribute to the project but commented online that they were enjoying reading other people's contributions. In fact, 400 people on Twitter mentioned that they were reading tweets but didn't actually contribute to the project, if you see what I mean. And that's strange, and I wasn't expecting that, because the project, people were using the project as a means to discover new bands or people to follow, and the project therefore is becoming an intervention, a channel of sorts, rather than simply a mechanism for capturing what was happening. These responses reveal a baffling level of detail, particularly the long-form responses that were sent by email, and I feel really, really lucky and privileged to be able to devote the next 3 years to looking at ways of making sense of this. So, to finish, why bring this to Music Tech Fest? Well, the Music Tech Fest website says that it's an attempt to bring the entire music technology ecosystem under one roof. So, amongst you, there are going to be companies and organizations, or music startups, what have you, who might find this data useful in some way. There are also hackers, researchers who might be able to help me make sense of the data. There are artists and developers who might want to make something out of the data, whether that's a piece of music or some visualization. Or some of you might just be curious about the project and would like to know where it goes next. You and me both, because I'm going to find that out over the next 3 years. But essentially, I'm here to tell you about the project, gather your feedback, meet new and interesting people, and find people who might want to work with me on Harkive. So please do come and find me if you found this interesting and you want to know more. I have the Harkive 2014 data with me, so people in yellow t-shirts, if you want to play with it, you're more than welcome to have it. You can do what you like with it. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the festival.